9:17 a.m., Wednesday morning. Rachel Montgomery stood in the lobby of Preston Tower Apartments, her worn sneakers squeaking slightly on the polished marble floor. She clutched a manila folder containing her lease application, bank statements, and employment verification. The folder was dog-eared from being carried to 12 different apartment showings in the past 3 weeks. 12 rejections for reasons that were never quite explained clearly. Property manager Donald Whitmore didn't look up from his computer screen when Rachel approached the gleaming reception desk. He was 54, balding, with the kind of perpetual scowl that suggested he'd been disappointed by life and intended to share that disappointment with everyone he encountered. His expensive suit and gold Rolex screamed success, but his eyes held nothing but contempt. "I'm here for my 9:30 appointment to sign the lease for Unit 4B, Rachel said politely, placing her folder on the marble counter. "Mr. Whitmore, we spoke on the phone yesterday about finalizing everything." Whitmore finally glanced up, his eyes scanning Rachel from head to toe with obvious distaste. Her simple jeans, faded college sweatshirt, and natural hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. His expression shifted from disinterest to active hostility in seconds. "There's been a mistake," he said flatly, pushing her folder back across the counter without opening it. "Unit 4B is no longer available for lease." Rachel's heart sank, but she maintained her composure. "That's impossible. You confirmed yesterday that my application was approved. I have the email right here on my phone showing the confirmation." She pulled out her phone, scrolling to the email thread that clearly showed Whitmore's assistant confirming her approval and today's lease signing appointment. Whitmore barely glanced at the screen. Things change quickly in real estate. The previous tenant decided to renew their lease. The unit is occupied. But yesterday you said the tenant was moving out this weekend. You told me I could move in on the 1st of next month. I said the unit might be available. You must have misunderstood. Whitmore's voice carried the practiced condescension of someone who'd perfected the art of gaslighting. "Perhaps you should look for housing more suited to your budget and background." The words hung in the air like toxic smoke. Rachel felt the familiar sting of discrimination, but she'd learned long ago not to react emotionally. She needed housing. She had a job starting in 2 weeks that required her to relocate to this city. She'd already given notice at her previous apartment. "Mr. Whitmore, I submitted 3 months of bank statements showing I earn 4 times the monthly rent. My credit score is 780. I have employment verification from a Fortune 500 company. What exactly about my application is problematic?" Whitmore's face reddened slightly. "Look, miss," he emphasized the word with obvious disrespect. "Preston Tower maintains certain standards for our residents. We have a reputation to uphold. Our current tenants expect a certain type of neighbor. What type would that be?" Rachel asked quietly, her voice steady despite the anger building inside her. "Professional people. Established families. People who fit the community culture we've carefully cultivated here." He leaned back in his expensive leather chair, clearly comfortable with his authority. "I'm sure you understand." A well-dressed white couple entered the lobby, pulling expensive luggage. Whitmore's demeanor transformed instantly. His scowl became a practiced smile of professional hospitality. "Mr. and Mrs. Davidson, welcome back from your trip. How was Paris?" He stood to greet them warmly, completely ignoring Rachel's presence. The couple chatted pleasantly about their vacation while Rachel stood at the counter, her folder still pushed aside like garbage. When the Davidsons finally headed toward the elevators, Whitmore returned his attention to Rachel with obvious irritation. "Is there anything else? I have actual appointments to manage." Rachel took a deep breath, fighting to maintain her composure. "I want to speak with your supervisor or the building owner about this discriminatory practice." Whitmore laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "Discriminatory? I'm simply managing occupancy according to building policies. You're welcome to file whatever complaint you want. I've been doing this job for 23 years. I know exactly what I can and cannot say." He pulled out a business card and slid it across the counter. "Here's the corporate office number. Feel free to call. They'll tell you the same thing I'm telling you. The unit is unavailable." Rachel picked up the business card, noting the corporate logo. Preston Properties Management. She recognized the name but said nothing. I'd also like to see the fair housing compliance documentation for this building, Rachel said calmly. Federal law requires you to maintain records of all rental applications and rejection reasons. Whitmore's expression darkened. Are you threatening me with legal action? I'm requesting information I'm legally entitled to access. There's a difference. Listen carefully, Whitmore said, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. You don't want to make trouble here. This city has a very tight real estate market. Word gets around about difficult applicants. You make waves here, and you'll find every landlord in town suddenly has no vacancies. That's just how things work. The threat was clear and illegal, but delivered with the confidence of someone who'd made similar threats many times before without consequences. Rachel gathered her folder slowly, deliberately. Mr. Whitmore, you've made your position very clear. Thank you for your time. She turned to leave, her worn sneakers squeaking again on the marble floor. Behind her, she heard Whitmore mutter to himself, loud enough to be heard. These people always think they deserve things they haven't earned. Rachel paused at the door but didn't turn around. She pulled out her phone and made a call, putting it on speaker as she pushed through the glass doors into the morning sunlight. Marcus, it's Rachel. I need you to pull the complete ownership documentation for Preston Tower Apartments and all Preston Properties Management holdings. Everything. Corporate structure, board members, property deeds, the whole portfolio. Marcus Chen's voice came through the speaker, confused. Rachel, that's going to take a few hours. What's going on? Just get me everything. And Marcus, pull the discrimination complaint history for Donald Whitmore. I want every filing, every settlement, every incident report from his entire career. She ended the call and stood on the sidewalk, looking up at the gleaming 40-story luxury apartment building. Preston Tower was one of the most prestigious addresses in the city. Whitmore had no idea who he'd just refused. Rachel Montgomery wasn't just looking for an apartment. She was the senior vice president of Montgomery Development Corporation, the largest real estate investment firm in the region. Her family's company owned or held significant stakes in over 60 commercial and residential properties throughout the city, representing roughly $4.7 billion in real estate assets. And Donald Whitmore had just discriminated against one of the most powerful people in the entire real estate industry. Rachel's phone buzzed with a text from her assistant. Board meeting moved to 2 p.m. Your father wants to discuss the Preston acquisition before the vote. Rachel smiled coldly. The timing was perfect. 6 hours later, Rachel sat in the executive boardroom of Montgomery Development Corporation on the 52nd floor of the city's tallest skyscraper. The room's floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the entire metropolitan area, including a clear sight of Preston Tower in the distance. Her father, Robert Montgomery, sat at the head of the massive conference table, reviewing documents. At 68, he remained sharp and commanding, the architect of the family's real estate empire. Around the table sat the company's board of directors, legal counsel, and senior executives. Rachel, you've been reviewing the Preston Properties acquisition for 3 months, Robert said. The board is ready to vote on the $340 million purchase. What's your final recommendation? Rachel opened her laptop, projecting financial data onto the massive screen behind her. Preston Properties Management controls 23 residential buildings and 7 commercial properties in prime locations throughout the city. The portfolio is valued at $340 million, but our analysis suggests the actual market value is closer to $420 million. It's an excellent investment opportunity. The board members nodded, reviewing their own copies of the financial projections. However, Rachel continued, her voice taking on a harder edge. Our due diligence has revealed significant legal liabilities that weren't disclosed in the initial sale documents. She clicked to the next slide, displaying a detailed chart. Preston Properties has been named in 47 fair housing discrimination complaints over the past 5 years. 32 of those complaints involve one specific property manager, Donald Whitmore, who oversees their flagship property, Preston Tower. The room grew quiet as board members leaned forward, studying the data. These aren't minor complaints, Rachel explained. We're talking about systematic discrimination based on race, religion, national origin, and familial status. Multiple complaints allege that Whitmore and other Preston managers use coded language to reject qualified applicants from protected classes. Robert Montgomery frowned. Have any of these complaints resulted in legal action or settlements? 17 cases were settled out of court for undisclosed amounts. The legal department estimates Preston Properties has paid at least $3.2 million in discrimination settlements over 5 years. That's not included in their financial disclosures. The company's general counsel, Patricia Williams, spoke up. If we acquire Preston Properties with this known liability, we inherit potential ongoing litigation and regulatory scrutiny. The Department of Housing and Urban Development could launch a comprehensive investigation. Rachel clicked to another slide showing photographs and incident reports. This morning, I personally experienced discrimination at Preston Tower. I submitted a rental application for Unit 4B under my maiden name. My application was approved based on my financial qualifications. But when I arrived to sign the lease, Donald Whitmore took one look at me and rejected my application on the spot. The board members exchanged shocked glances. He told me the unit was suddenly unavailable, Rachel continued. He suggested I look for housing more suited to my budget and background. He implied I didn't fit the community culture. When I requested fair housing documentation, he threatened that word would spread about me being a difficult applicant, making it impossible to rent anywhere in the city. She played an audio recording from her phone. Her voice had been recording the entire interaction with Whitmore without his knowledge, perfectly legal in this single-party consent state. The board listened in stunned silence as Whitmore's voice came through the speakers, dripping with contempt. These people always think they deserve things they haven't earned. Robert Montgomery's face had gone red with anger. He's talking about my daughter, about a senior vice president of this company, about someone with more money and power than he'll see in 10 lifetimes. Rachel remained calm. He's talking about every person of color who's tried to rent from Preston Properties and been rejected based on appearance rather than qualifications. I'm just one of dozens who've experienced this treatment. The difference is, I have the resources to do something about it. Patricia Williams reviewed her legal notes. Rachel, this recording could be powerful evidence in a discrimination lawsuit. But if we're planning to acquire Preston Properties, suing them complicates the transaction significantly. Rachel smiled coldly. I'm not suggesting we sue them. I'm suggesting we buy them, fire everyone involved in these discriminatory practices, and transform their entire operation into a model of fair housing compliance. She clicked to her final slide showing a detailed implementation plan. Here's my proposal. We proceed with the acquisition at a reduced price of $295 million, citing the undisclosed legal liabilities as justification for the discount. That's $45 million less than the agreed price. We use the savings to establish a $20 million fair housing compliance fund. We immediately terminate Donald Whitmore and any other managers with documented discrimination complaints. We implement mandatory bias training for all Preston employees. We partner with fair housing organizations to create oversight and accountability measures. The board members began nodding as they reviewed the proposal. We turn Preston Properties from a liability into an industry leader in fair housing practices, Rachel concluded. We protect our investment while doing the right thing ethically and legally. Robert Montgomery looked at his daughter with obvious pride. Motion to approve Rachel's modified acquisition proposal? I second the motion, Patricia Williams said immediately. The vote was unanimous. Montgomery Development Corporation would acquire Preston Properties, and Donald Whitmore's career was about to end in the most spectacular way possible. The next morning, Rachel returned to Preston Tower at exactly 9:17 a.m., the same time as her previous visit. This time, she wasn't alone. She was accompanied by Marcus Chen, the company's head of acquisitions, Patricia Williams, their general counsel, and Robert Montgomery himself. They walked through the gleaming lobby where Donald Whitmore sat at his desk, reviewing rental applications. He glanced up casually, then did a double-take when he recognized Rachel. You again, he said with obvious annoyance. I told you yesterday, there are no available units. You need to leave before I call security. Rachel smiled pleasantly. Mr. Whitmore, I'd like to introduce you to some people. This is Marcus Chun, Patricia Williams, and Robert Montgomery. Whitmore's expression shifted from annoyance to confusion. Robert Montgomery? As in Montgomery Development Corporation? The same, Robert said coldly. The company that, as of 8 a.m. this morning, officially owns Preston Properties Management and every building in their portfolio, including Preston Tower. The color drained from Whitmore's face. What? That's impossible. The acquisition wasn't supposed to close for another month. We accelerated the timeline, Marcus explained. When we discovered significant undisclosed legal liabilities, we renegotiated the terms and closed the deal immediately. As of today, you work for Montgomery Development Corporation. Whitmore looked frantically between the executives, his mind clearly racing to understand the implications. Mr. Whitmore, Rachel said quietly, do you remember what you told me yesterday? You said I should look for housing more suited to my background. You said I didn't fit the community culture here. You threatened that word would spread about me being difficult, making it impossible to rent anywhere in the city. Whitmore's hands were shaking. I was just following building policies about tenant screening. Really? Rachel pulled out her phone and played the audio recording. Whitmore's voice filled the lobby, crystal clear. These people always think they deserve things they haven't earned. Several tenants in the lobby stopped to listen, their faces showing shock and disgust. Mr. Whitmore, Patricia Williams said in her lawyer voice, you violated federal fair housing laws, state anti-discrimination statutes, and basic human decency. You've exposed this company to millions of dollars in legal liability. You've created a hostile environment for dozens of qualified applicants based solely on their race. I didn't mean, Whitmore stammered. I was just trying to maintain standards. The standards you maintained were illegal, immoral, and expensive, Robert Montgomery said. You cost the previous owners at least $3.2 million in discrimination settlements. You cost them $45 million in acquisition value when we reduced our purchase price due to your documented misconduct. Rachel stepped closer to Whitmore's desk. And you cost yourself your career. Effective immediately, you're terminated for cause. You have 30 minutes to collect your personal belongings and vacate the premises. Security will escort you out. Whitmore's face went from pale to red. You can't do this. I have rights. I have a contract. Your contract includes a termination for cause clause, Patricia explained. Discrimination and creating legal liability absolutely qualifies. You'll receive no severance, no recommendations, and your termination will be reported to every professional real estate organization. Your career in property management is over. 2 security guards appeared, clearly having been briefed on the situation. This is discrimination, Whitmore shouted desperately. You're firing me because of that recording. I'll sue for wrongful termination. Please do, Patricia said calmly. We'll see you in court with 47 other discrimination complaints, 17 settlements, and audio evidence of you violating federal law. I'm confident about our position. The security guards moved to either side of Whitmore's desk, making it clear his time was up. Rachel leaned on the marble counter, the same counter where Whitmore had pushed her application aside like garbage just 24 hours earlier. Mr. Whitmore, you told me that people like me always think we deserve things we haven't earned. But here's what you didn't know. My family built this city's skyline. Montgomery Development has constructed or renovated over 60 buildings in this metropolitan area. We employ 2,000 people. We've invested $4.7 billion in this community. She paused, letting the numbers sink in. So when you looked at my worn sneakers and faded sweatshirt and decided I didn't belong here, you weren't seeing reality. You were seeing your own prejudices. You were seeing stereotypes instead of a person. And those prejudices just cost you everything. Whitmore stood slowly, his hands still shaking. He looked around the lobby at the tenants watching his humiliation, the security guards waiting to escort him out, and the executives who now controlled his professional fate. I have a family, he said quietly. I have a mortgage. I have bills. So does every person you discriminated against, Rachel replied without sympathy. Every qualified applicant you rejected because they didn't look right to you. Every family you denied housing to because of your prejudices. They all had bills and mortgages and families, too. The difference is they were the victims. You were the perpetrator. The security guards gestured toward the office behind the reception desk where Whitmore kept his personal belongings. 30 minutes, one guard said firmly. Then you're permanently banned from all Montgomery development properties. Whitmore walked toward his office, his expensive suit and gold Rolex suddenly looking like costumes on a man whose power had evaporated in minutes. Rachel turned to address the tenants who had gathered in the lobby, drawn by the commotion. Good morning, everyone. My name is Rachel Montgomery, Senior Vice President of Montgomery Development Corporation. As of today, we are the new owners of Preston Tower and all Preston Properties buildings. We're committed to making this a welcoming, inclusive community that treats every resident and applicant with dignity and respect. She pulled out a stack of business cards. If anyone has experienced discrimination or unfair treatment in this building or any Preston property, please contact our new Fair Housing Compliance Office. We're investigating all past incidents and implementing comprehensive reforms. An elderly black woman approached hesitantly. Miss Montgomery, I applied here 6 months ago. Mr. Whitmore told me the building didn't allow Section 8 vouchers, but I later learned that was a lie. He just didn't want low-income tenants. Rachel handed her a business card. Please call this number today. We're reviewing every rejected application from the past 2 years. If you were discriminated against, we'll make it right. Over the next hour, 7 people approached with similar stories. A Hispanic family told they were too loud. A Muslim woman told the building didn't allow head coverings in common areas. A gay couple told the community wasn't a good fit for their lifestyle. Each story was documented, each person given direct contact information for the compliance office. When Whitmore finally emerged from his office carrying a cardboard box of personal belongings, the lobby was filled with former applicants sharing their experiences of discrimination. He had to walk through a gauntlet of people he'd rejected, people he judged as unworthy based on appearance, accent, religion, or family status. The security guards escorted him to the door. As he passed Rachel, she spoke one final time. Mr. Whitmore, I hope you learned something from this experience. I hope you understand that your prejudices didn't just hurt other people. They destroyed your own life. That's what hate does. Consumes everything. Whitmore didn't respond. He walked through the glass doors into the morning sunlight, carrying his box of belongings, his career in ruins. 6 months later, Preston Tower had been transformed. The lobby now displayed prominent fair housing posters in multiple languages. The staff had completed 80 hours of bias training. A resident advisory board included representatives from diverse backgrounds who had input on building policies. Most importantly, the building's demographics had shifted dramatically. Where once it was 89% white residents, it now reflected the actual diversity of the city. Families of all backgrounds, religions, and income levels lived side by side. Rachel stood in the same lobby where she'd been discriminated against, now renovated with artwork celebrating the city's multicultural heritage. Her father joined her, looking around with satisfaction. You turned a $340 million real estate deal into something more important. You created real change. Rachel smiled. The business case was always solid. But yes, this feels better than just profit margins. Her phone buzzed with a news alert. Former property manager sentenced in discrimination case. She opened the article, reading about Donald Whitmore's conviction for systematic fair housing violations. He'd been fined $250,000 and banned from property management for life. The article quoted several victims whose lives had been impacted by his discrimination. But it also noted the reforms at Montgomery Development Corporation had become a model for the entire industry. Rachel's assistant approached with a clipboard. Ms. Montgomery, you have a lease signing at 2 p.m. The Chin family is moving into Unit 4B. The same unit Whitmore had refused to rent to Rachel 6 months earlier. I'll be there, Rachel said. At 2 p.m., she met the Chun family, recent immigrants with 3 young children. They were nervous, clearly intimidated by the luxury building. Welcome to Preston Tower, Rachel said warmly, shaking hands with both parents. We're honored to have you as residents. Mrs. Chen's eyes filled with tears. We applied to so many places. Everyone said no. They said our English wasn't good enough, or we had too many children, or we didn't fit their community. You're the first people who treated us like we belonged. Rachel thought about Whitmore's words. These people always think they deserve things they haven't earned. You do belong here, Rachel said firmly. This is your home now. As the Chun family signed their lease and received their keys, Rachel looked around the lobby that had once been a symbol of exclusion and discrimination. Now it was becoming something better. A genuine community. Her phone buzzed with a message from the Fair Housing Compliance Office. Discrimination complaints down 94% across all former Preston properties. Tenant satisfaction up 67%. Industry leaders requesting meetings to learn about our model. Rachel forwarded the message to her father with a simple note. This is what justice looks like. Real change doesn't happen when someone with power stands up once. Real change happens when systems are transformed, when policies are reformed, when accountability becomes standard practice. Donald Whitmore had looked at Rachel Montgomery and seen only stereotypes and prejudices. He'd seen someone who didn't belong, someone who hadn't earned the right to live in his building. He'd been catastrophically wrong about who she was. But more importantly, he'd been wrong about what people deserve. Everyone deserves dignity. Everyone deserves fair treatment. Everyone deserves a chance. Rachel had used her power not just to punish discrimination, but to create lasting change that would benefit thousands of people for years to come. That evening, Rachel returned to her own apartment, a modest place she'd chosen deliberately despite being able to afford any residence in the city. She opened her laptop and began writing her monthly column for the Real Estate Industry Journal. This month's topic: why fair housing isn't just ethical, it's profitable. She wrote about the Preston Tower transformation, about the increased tenant retention, about the positive media coverage, about the industry leadership position Montgomery Development had achieved. But she also wrote about Mrs. Chen's tears, about the 7 people who'd approached her in the lobby with stories of discrimination, about the community that was forming when barriers were removed instead of reinforced. Real estate isn't just about buildings and profit margins, she wrote. It's about creating communities where everyone has the opportunity to thrive. When we exclude people based on prejudice, we don't just harm them. We harm ourselves, our businesses, and our society. She posted the column and immediately received responses from industry leaders, fair housing advocates, and people who'd experienced discrimination. One message stood out. It was from Donald Whitmore. Ms. Montgomery, I've spent 6 months in court-ordered bias training and community service. I'm working with fair housing organizations now, teaching others about the harm discrimination causes. I'll never manage property again, but I'm trying to prevent others from making my mistakes. I'm sorry for what I did to you and everyone else I hurt. I was wrong about everything. Rachel read the message twice, then responded simply. Thank you for your honesty. Keep doing the work. Accountability wasn't just about punishment. It was about growth, change, and becoming better than you were before. Rachel closed her laptop and looked out her window at the city skyline, at the buildings her family had built, at Preston Tower glowing in the distance. She'd been refused a lease because someone looked at her and saw only stereotypes. That refusal had triggered a chain of events that transformed an entire company, changed industry practices, and created opportunities for thousands of people. Sometimes justice isn't immediate. Sometimes it requires patience, strategy, and the willingness to use power for something bigger than personal revenge. Donald Whitmore had refused to rent to Rachel Montgomery because of his prejudices. He'd had no idea she owned half the city. But the real story wasn't about her power. It was about what she chose to do with it. And that choice changed everything.